Howdy, Suanda, Cheryl Bear Slee, Nathle West End, and Denu Slee. My name is Cheryl Bear, and I'm from the beautiful village of Nathle West End First Nation, which is located in central BC, about an hour and a half west of Prince George. I'm from the Bear Clan, and right now I'm coming to you from the beautiful land of Coast Salish, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. Welcome to this video, which will be having, we have some special guests here, Dr. Tinker and Dr. Lansdowne, who are going to share with us Indigenous theology. I'll turn it over to Lauren.
Hi, I'm Lauren Sanders. I am the Indigenous Spiritual Care Chaplain at First United Church Community Ministries Society. And my Indigenous name is Mosadam, and I am Jigwe clan, which is thunder. Today we are going to have a prayer and a land acknowledgement together. So please pray with me. Great mystery, we thank you for this wonderful time that we have together. We come together as a community of thoughtful, caring, loving peoples. And we lift up the work that we are doing as a community. We lift it up and we hope that it edifies the people around us, our community. We ask that you help us honor the land that we learn, live, and love on. Here in Vancouver, we are on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And we pray that we give honor to all of the ancestors. Aho, Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Lauren. So before I introduce our speakers, I'm going to ask our guests, our witnesses, to introduce themselves. Let's start with Adrian.
My name's Adrian Jacobs. I am Cayuga of this Six Nations Haudenosaunee Confederacy from Southern Ontario. My clan name is Gunusano, which means Deer Lodge. And I am the keeper of the circle at Sandy Soto Spiritual Center, which is here in Beausejour, Manitoba. It is Treaty 1 territory, so I live as guest here. I have 5 children and 3 grandchildren, and thankful to be able to be a part of this session here today.
Andre.
Tansei Nia Ray Aldred. I'm from northern Alberta originally, Treaty 8. My mother was born on the banks of the Lesser Slave Lake, which is 4 hours north of Edmonton, and lived in a tent for the first 6 years of her life. And I have 4 adult children and some grandchildren. But I'm working here on the traditional ancestral unceded territory of the Musqueam people at the Vancouver School of Theology as the director of the Indigenous Studies program. Thanks.
Hubert.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hubert Barton. My Nishkat name is Lubait Bashkibu, which translates into running wolf of the Nishkat Nation from the community of Gingol, located in northern British Columbia. Right now, I am living in Vancouver, Hastings Sunrise neighborhood, the unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. And I am currently working with Ray at the Indigenous Studies program, and I am doing the work of program coordinator.
Thanks, everybody. And Lauren.
Oh, I introduced myself. Didn't I introduce myself already?
Did you?
I mean, I would love to introduce myself for a longer time.
I was totally listening to everything you said.
The away, right?
Oh, all right. Okay, well, I will introduce our special guests and our speakers. So today we are very honored to have with us Dr. George Tink Tinker, who everyone affectionately calls Tink. He is an Osage elder, a highly respected voice, a highly respected elder amongst indigenous communities all across the Americas. And, uh, and we're grateful he's here. I'm going to read his bio from ILIF. A member of the faculty since 1985, Tinker teaches courses in American Indian cultures, history, and religious traditions, cross-cultural and third world theologies, and justice and peace studies, and is a frequent speaker on these topics both in the US and internationally. His publications include American Indian Liberation, A Theology of Sovereignty, Spirit and Resistance, Political Theology and American Indian Liberation, and Missionary Conquest, The Gospel and Native American Genocide. He co-authored a Native American Theology, and he is co-editor of Native Voices, An American Indian Identity and Resistance, and Fortress Press People's Bible. Dr. Tinker has volunteered in the Indian community as director of Four Winds American Indian Survival Project in Denver for 2 decades. In that capacity, he functions in the urban Indian community as a traditional American Indian spiritual leader. He is past president of the Native American Theological Association and a member of the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologies. Firmly committed to the ecumenical movement, he has been an active in volunteer capacities with several denominations at the national level, the National Council of Churches, and the World Council of Churches. He currently serves as honorary advisor to the international movement against all forms of discrimination and racism, and he also serves locally on the Leadership Council of the American Indian Movement of Colorado. And I would like to ask Dr. Tinker if you would like to introduce yourself any further.
Cool. Thank you, Cheryl. And thank you, all of you, for this invitation. I'm honored. Blinde Wajaji Utsele, Groma Tuonton. I'm a citizen of the Osage Nation and a member of the Eagle Clan. Blinde Khulele Eji. My name is Spotted Eagle. But my Christian name is Tinker. And that's what the publishers want on those books. In fact, they want the name George on those books, even though I've never used it because it was always my father's name. He's now gone, but I still respect his usage of that name. 35 years I taught at ILIF. And a decade before that, in Berkeley, while I was doing my PhD, don't tell people this, but I taught Greek for 10 years. And it was an interesting journey as an Indian to be learning Greek, because you always learn Greek, not through Osage or an Indian language, but through the colonized language. So everything I know about Greek has to be unpacked in English. Crazy little factum there that we Indians all need to pay attention to. I have over the years, and Cheryl, you mentioned this before we started to record, I have over the years become much more radical and controversial, intentionally controversial. And I want to invite you all not to run me out of town. You can't, because I'm not in Vancouver. I'm here in Cheyenne and Arapaho unceded territory where I live. But I look forward to the time when I can be with you in Vancouver. don't run me out of town. Listen to what I say, because you have to respond to the questions I'm generating. Whether you cling to your Christian identification or have moved more back towards a native identification. And I'm distinguishing that in a manner that clarifies that they are two different world views. I think that's where we have to begin. We really do have to understand that the Euro-Christians brought a worldview with them, and they brought a Jesus with them that had been shaped already for 1,500 years on the European continent before their first beachhead on Turtle Island. That's quite a thing to reckon with. That is to say, they didn't bring us the historical Jesus or the true Jesus or the real Jesus. They brought us their Jesus, who was an imaginary created by their theologians and their people on the street over 1,500 years in Europe. And that's the only Jesus accessible to our native peoples. We start there. And it's not in any way intended to defame the person of Jesus. I have read the Gospels in Greek and have a certain amount of appreciation for that early imagination of who Jesus was in the Gospels. I have more and more distanced myself as an American Indian from that Jesus that the Europeans brought to us because of the worldview question. Let me unpack it this way, because I have a whole list of things that we could unpack, but I understand we don't have time to do all of that. But the first thing they brought to us was a radical Euro-Christian individualism, which is not that old on the European continent. It's born after the Black Plague of 1348 to 1352. And it grows up in its infancy to adulthood during this thing called the European Renaissance. That's when individualism became such a distinct part of Christianity. That's when Luther invented this justification by faith dictum that seems to hold sway in most of Protestantism. That's about individual. It's about me and God, the individual and Jesus, the individual and the divine. Whereas our people have always lived, acted, and behaved in the best interests of the community of the whole. Not of the self, but of the whole. And the self is only important as a part of that community whole. Well, in that kind of Protestant Reformation thought, it's really about me and God. And once I'm okay with God, I don't know about the rest of you. You all have to figure that out. I can't say. I just know that I'm okay. That's a world away from our ancestors and traditional people still today who see their first commitment back to the people, and not just to the people, but in that interrelationship to, if I can say it this way, all the people. That is a maple tree that grows outside my window here. That is bunnies that have proliferated on the green belt in front of our town home. The coyotes who occasionally stray over this way in order to take a rabbit, a hawk that comes through here, that lives here this time of year through the summer, who also occasionally will take a rabbit for lunch. Those are people too that I'm in relationship with. And our traditional people still today want us to maintain that kind of relationship with all people. I had to do some work in terms of decolonizing myself to get rid of, for most cases, the use of the English word it. I don't know about your languages, but Osage doesn't have any word for it. We have no word for thing, no word for object, because all people have life and there are relatives. That means I can't call a tree it because it's either male or female, depending on the tree, and it has its own life. And that's why when we need to take a tree for ceremony or for building, we go out and offer a gift back to that tree, maybe tobacco, burn a little cedar or a little sage, smoke that tree down, talk to it, tell it why we need to take its life. And that's why, my sister tells me when I put out a tray of food for the Wanagi when we're back together in Oklahoma on the res. Oh, we don't do that anymore, she says. What? You've sacrificed your relationship to your ancestors? Because the missionaries told you it's only that individual relationship with Jesus or God that's important? I not only set out a plate of food for my ancestors, I'm acutely aware of how my mother and my father will respond to what we put on that plate of food. And I make sure if there's hot sauce on the table that it goes on that plate of food, because I know both of them, my mother and father, will want to taste that bit of spice. My mother's not Indian, so she's maybe a little lost in that Wanagi world, but she's with my dad, and he's there to hold her hand and show her the way back to our dining room table at mealtime. So that individualism is one of the sea changes that makes traditional life much harder. A lot of Osages who have converted to Christianity will say, "Oh no, we still have that respect. We don't offer a Wanagi dish, but we still have that respect." But the further they get away from it, the easier it is not to pay attention to it. Whereas I'm raising my daughter to pay attention to it at all times. She's become an insect rescuer. Last year, she rescued butterflies with damaged wings, brought them inside, put them in an enclosure, fed them so that they could live out a little bit of life with some comfort before they passed away. I mean, she's wonderful that way. She knows those are her relatives. It gets trickier where I need to go next, because the whole Euro-Christian theological framework is based on this notion of a cosmic struggle between good and evil, between God and Satan. And you all know we don't have a Satan figure in our communities. We don't have a devil, a personification of evil. We have some strange characters, right? Like for us, Coyote is one of those strange characters who does everything backwards, it seems like, and is always teaching us by doing things backwards. You know, a crazy guy. Uh, but Coyote is not the devil. In fact, in some Indian traditions, Coyote's one of the creators. Even if he creates by accident in the story, you know, that's the craziness of Coyote. Uh, but when you think about this cosmic struggle between good and evil, I challenge you, what's the word for evil in your language? And is that what it really means? And I'm going to argue that I don't think any of our languages ever had a word for evil. Among Osages, the word the missionaries picked, and that's how it works. The missionaries come along and they pick one of our words and ruin it forever by giving it European meaning so that we can't use it anymore in its traditional way. Well, the word they picked from us was Biji. Oh, Biji doesn't mean evil. Biji means bad. Like, like the wind blew a tree down on my house. That's Biji. That's not evil. Or the dog got a hold of one of my socks and chewed it up. That's really Biji. Bijion. But it's not evil. My dog's not evil. I don't know about yours. But what we experience mostly from dogs is unconditional love. even even when they're chewing a sock, when she's done chewing the sock, she's there for me to pet her and to lick my hand, thinking I didn't do anything. I was just being a dog. Zonge Bishi, Zonge Bishi, bad dog. We use that word Bishi to talk about a dog that way. So you can see it's a big, big worldview leap to suddenly convert Biji into this European notion of evil. Well, let's carry that one step further. That cosmic struggle between good and evil, between God and Satan. If we don't have a Satan, and this is an essay Vine Deloria asked me to write years ago, and unfortunately I didn't write it before he died. He wanted me to write it so he could footnote it. The essay is Why I Don't Believe in a Creator. And it's available online. I think Ilef has posted it now online. We don't have a God until the missionaries come and bring their God imaginary with them and again pick one of our words, and that word becomes God. My colleague up at University of Toledo, a Seneca woman, Barbara Mann, has written a book, a great book, Iroquoian Women, in which she argues that there is no such thing as evil in the Iroquoian Seneca tradition. She's Seneca. But she goes back and retells the Seneca creation story. And sure, there's a creator. In fact, there's 4 creators, not one, but 4. 2 women and 2 men, a mother-daughter, and then the 2 twins. Fascinating stuff. And of course, Christian interpreters, anthropologists get a hold of that. And they turn the two twins into the good twin and the evil twin. And Barbara is very, very clear in demonstrating that that's what she calls Euroforming, that the twins are not good and evil. They just have different ideals and do different things for human being. The one twin, called the good twin by Euro-Christians, wants to make things easy for humans. And Flint Boy, the other twin, creates all these storms and mountains and fast-running rivers that flood in order to give challenges to human beings. That's not evil. He's trying to make life more interesting for the people. So if we don't have a God, what do we have? After all, the missionaries picked the word, the Osage word, Wakonda, which is a short form. It's the long form is Wakontonka, and it's related to the Lakota Dakota Wakantanka, just a little different vowel in the Osage. Wakonda. Wakonda isn't a being. It's not a personality. It is, in fact, that creative energy, that creative force that courses through the universe. And even 100 years ago, Osage elders were perfectly clear. Wakonda is in me and it's in you. It's in that tree person outside my window. It's in those rabbits. It's in the grass. It's in the hawks and the eagles, the sparrows. And my daughter would insist, of course, it's in the buffalo too, because she's Buffalo Clan. Yeah, Wakonda is not a person. It's not a god. It's that creative energy that courses through the universe. That picture of the nebula behind Hubert Barton's head on screen, that's Wakonda at work. But it's at work in every fiber, every vessel, blood vessel in our bodies, every cell. So how are we going to deal with this Christianity that wants to impose God talk on us? Well, you need to understand one other thing in terms of worldview. The Euro-Christians came with an overall framing schema, a cognitive metaphor that shapes the whole world around them, which cognitive linguists, people like George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, call the up-down image schema. That everything runs in an up-down hierarchy. And they think that's perfectly natural because human beings walk upright. But I would argue our worldview is collateral egalitarian and not up-down at all. In that up-down image schema, you're dealing with a hierarchy where everybody has a boss. Every corporation has its hierarchy of the CEO up here, the CFO, the COO, and then upper level executive management, middle management, and finally you get down to the four people, what we used to call foremen, but and then below them, the workers. That's the hierarchy. And it's the most natural thing in the world for Euro-Christians. Government, same way. King, royalty, lesser royalty, and then finally the peons who do the actual fighting when there's a war, or the planting of the grain, or president, the Congress, the judiciary, the states, and finally you get down to the people who do the actual voting. And we think this is a government for the people, by the people, and of the people, and it's really not. It's what we call a procedural democracy, because nobody gets to represent the people unless you start off having access to enormous amounts of money. In the US, it works that way. I suspect in Canada too, but I know the US. I'm told virtually every member of the US Congress is a millionaire, at least once, and usually several times over. Well, how can they represent Indians on a reservation that is suffering? Pine Ridge, 87% unemployment. Rosebud, 85% unemployment. Hoopa, 92% unemployment. How do those rich people, rich white people mostly, represent Indian people? That's that up-down image schema where the hierarchy determines where the power is. And the power, the higher you go in the hierarchy, the more power there is. And religion, Euro-Christian religion, works the same way. People want to know, Tink, what's your Osage word for God? I say, we don't have one. Because if I picked one, I'd have to start by picking a gender. And what am I going to pick? Well, Christian male sky god, that's close at hand. We'll take that one. We'll work with that. And that's what Wakonda means today on the Osage, is the Christian male sky god. In our traditional way, I was taught we start our prayers, Wakonda Monshita. That energy above, Wakonda Utseta. That energy below, grandfather and grandmother. And you have not one, but the number two. You have what man calls the twinship principle. It's always a pairing of male and female. So the creator's two women and two men, you have that same pairing principle among the Senecas, the same thing among the Osages, the same thing among the different Mayan peoples I visited with and taught seminars to in Guatemala. In fact, Barbara Mann would say the number one is dysfunctional. It always creates an imbalance. And in our collateral egalitarian worldview, our people have always been about balance and harmony. I'm assuming, Cheryl, you'll tell me when I've said enough and need to shut up, because we're only about a tenth of the way into all of this. It is so utterly complex, and so many different ways we can unpack the little bit I've said so far. But I'll keep going until you tell me.
Yes, please keep going.
Pardon?
Please keep going. I think we've got another, let's go for another 10 minutes or so. Is that all right?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, if for us, it's about harmony and balance. It's not about the future. It's not about time. And yet that Euro-Christian worldview, is entirely temporal. Vine made that point 50 years ago in God is Red when it was first published. Indian people are spatial. All our ceremonies are organized spatially. For us, it's about the spatiality of the land, of grandmother, the earth, and our relationship in a particular place to grandmother. Whereas for the Euro-Christians, everything's about time. People laugh at me when I suggest that Martin Heidegger, instead of writing the book Being in Time, should have written the book Being in Space. They think I'm just being cute, and I'm not. I'm making the point that temporality is so dominant that he couldn't have conceived of writing a book, Being in Space or Being in Place. And it goes back even before the Renaissance, all the way to this guy in North Africa called Augustine, sometimes referred to as Saint Augustine. In his book, The City of God, chapter 11, I think it is, where he parses the Latin language in terms of long vowels and short vowels. And it all gets parsed out in terms of time. How long you pronounce a vowel makes the difference between a long vowel and a short vowel. You see, temporality is dominant going way back in Euro-Christian theology. And that's what salvation is about. Salvation and eschatology, right? Because salvation is about my future, what's going to happen to me after I die. Eschatology, the theological study of the end times, it gets so confusing because Christian theologians realize they have a bit of a problem there, that they've got to somehow pull that back and talk about the present. So they talk about bizarre concepts like realized eschatology, actualized eschatology. You all know the language. In order to make it real in the present. But ultimately, eschatology is about the end of the times. Indian people know, all our traditional people, that this world may end sometime. And we know more acutely today that at least human beings may end on this planet in the near future because of what Euro-Christian economics has done to the earth. They've commodified everything. And some of them have been so in a hurry to extract mineral wealth from our grandmother because they've assumed the end time is coming anyway. We may as well dig up this uranium and turn it into money. Well, they were busy doing that from the very beginning before they started converting our peoples on the East Coast, before they sent missionaries to Indian people. They were busy converting the land, the earth. And there's a Canadian white guy up in your neck of the woods somewhere who wrote a very good book, a little on the wordy side. It's about that thick. Earth into Property. And that's the conversion. They took our land and converted it into property that commodified it. And it begins already with people like John Locke and Rousseau. You know, Rousseau was clear, the first man, and he was sexist, so I'm going to leave it in the male gender. The first man to fence a piece of land and call it mine created civilization. Hey, what? Our ancestors have something to say about that, because what it looks like to us is this commodification of property is not civilization at all, but it's the first chink in this causal event chain that has created the climate emergency that we're in today. Because it's not just the land, but now the CEO of Nestle Corporation has assured the whole world it's entirely appropriate to treat water as a commodity. And you know what? Nestle is buying up water rights around native reserves in the US and Canada, depriving those reservations of water in order to bottle the purity of water, the only thing we had left, and to sell it on the open market. That's that commodification. And you think about temporality in that respect, none of that happens without the corporation having an extensive business plan. They must use time in order to evaluate the work of a laborer. So they have time clocks because they need to know how much to pay us. And so we clock in and clock out. And they can show, oh, you had 39 hours this week. You came up a little short. Here's your check. Docked 2 hours for whatever reason. Everything revolves around temporality. The business plan itself would absolutely collapse if there wasn't a projection for how long construction of the site is going to take, how long it's going to take in order to hire workers, in order to run the factory, and how long it's going to take to develop the network to get all the commodity into the marketplace and to sell it. All of that runs on Euro-Christian temporality, and so does their religion. At Four Winds, where I actually spent 25 years as the spiritual elder, we'd sometimes have white Christians from churches come to our ceremony because they were always welcome. And they would sit patiently for an hour while we go around the circle and give everyone a chance to speak. And after about 59 minutes and 59 seconds, you could see they were getting real antsy. And, we're only halfway around the circle. But they'll get up and excuse themselves, the height of rudeness, in order to make sure they get into the line at the pancake house before it gets too long. And I told my students at ILF over the years, if you can't do a liturgy, not Indian students now, these are non-Indian students. If you can't do a liturgy in 59 minutes and 59 seconds, your conference minister or bishop is going to have you moved out to the state line into a little town where they don't contribute that much anyway, where you can preach as long as you want. That's temporality. It even shows up in how long liturgies are expected to be. And that's Protestant liturgy. We have some Catholic students. I tell them, for y'all, it's 45 minutes because you have masses on the hour. And for us, it's about space. It's about what direction the door of Iungli faces. And it may depend upon which division you're in, what clan you are, whether the door opens to the east or to the west. Iungli is our sitting with the stones lodge. We brought the Sundance back, my brother did, to the Osage Nation 21 years ago. It's really important how we lay out the altar, lay out the arbor, the whole arbor being the altar. The dancers come in the east door first thing in the morning as the sun is rising. They rest at the west door in between rounds. And then at the end of the day, as the sun's going down, they make their exit again out of that east door and go over to Iungli to steam themselves off for the night before they sleep and get ready for the second day. We can say it's temporal because it's 4 days and 4 nights, right? No food and no water. For us, it's 4 days and 4 nights. But it's really spatial. It's about that altar. It's about that tree that's in the middle. And it's about the feet as you dance, hitting the earth and feeling the earth and being re-energized by the earth. And because it's Oklahoma and it's August, a dancer may not make it. They may get into the third day and collapse. Total dehydration. One of my jobs was to go into the center, bring that person out, not through the east gate, but bring them out the west gate. And behind the rest area for the dancers is our Iungli, our sitting with the Stones Lodge. And I would take them in there with 4 stones and half a bucket of water. And they didn't get a drink because they're still dancers, right? But rather, I would pour that water on those 4 hot stones, steaming them off, using an eagle wing to fan them off, and then leave them sit in that lodge for maybe up to an hour. And then they got to decide whether they were done or whether they were going back into the dance. And about half the time, they'd go back into the dance and finish 4 days of dancing. Amazing stuff, how that works. But that dance, that arbor, that altar just pulls them back in. That's spatiality. The fact that this is Cheyenne and Arapaho unceded territory, that's spatiality. You all know what this land back movement is. Land back isn't about getting property rights, even though we've seen some Christian churches particularly giving property back to Indian nations. A Methodist judicatory in Oregon just gave an old church that they're no longer using in Wallowa, Oregon, back to the Nez Perce. And actually, one of my former students, a white woman, is quoted in the article I read, and is very much involved in that. She's an assistant to the bishop out there. So I was really happy for her, happy that she learned something really useful maybe from being with me. We don't count that many victories, so I got to count them when I can. Yeah, land back's not about asking for property rights. As I understand it, land back is about asking for that relationship back to grandmother, asking for our culture back, for our languages back. And yeah, asking for our Euro-Christian relatives to give up their property rights so that we can have it back as land. So the movement's not property back, but land back. When the Lutherans here in Denver had $1 million offer for the old church building that we were using at Four Winds. And they know how radical I am. They know I'm not much of a Lutheran. Those crazy people decided to give us the building. 2 buildings, actually, the old parsonage and the church building on the corner. They were offered over $1 million for that property, the commodity. But they decided it'd be better used to give it to us. After all, we'd used it for 25 years at that point. We'd buried people there, married people there, celebrated sobriety anniversaries, all of that. And Colorado American Indian Movement told them, we ain't moving. you can kick us out, but lots of luck with that. There's going to be a lot of press there when you bring in the police because we're not going anywhere. Well, several years later, they just decided to give us the building. That was the ceremony when I finally retired from Four Winds 5 years ago. The Lutherans came with a liturgy printed out. The liturgy was titled Liturgy for the Transfer of Property from the Rocky Mountain Synod to Four Winds American Indian Council. And we looked at that liturgy, and the first thing we did was explain to them, y'all have kind of misunderstood what this is about. We know you've got to sign the property over to us. Yeah, we understand that. But this really isn't about transfer of property. This is about making relationships. Us with you and us with this land right here. And we invite you to be in relationship with this land, not as owners, but as children, in relationship to the mother. A whole different way of unpacking the world. That's what I mean by worldview. I'll say one other thing, then I'll begin to shut up. Worldview is not about an ideology. My white students think, oh yeah, I believe what you believe. That's not a worldview. See, a lot of them it's a liberal school, so a lot of them have these new age tendencies, right? And they want to say, my worldview is the same as American Indians. And I'm there to say, no, it's not. You don't even speak the language. Because worldview is in the language. Worldview is something you're born into. And you may have adopted some ideologies that are native-like, right? But that doesn't make you native. Your worldview is still what you were born into. It's like speaking a native language. Nobody in the United States can wake up one morning and decide, I was born into English, I've spoken English for 36 years, but I'm done with that. From now on, I'm going to speak only Mandarin. You know, lots of luck. Lots of luck. No, even people who have spent 25 years in Latin America speaking only Spanish assure me they still think in English. They still dream, a lot in English. Their worldview is still American and not Latin American, even though those worldviews are not so different until you get into Indian communities in Central America. Well, then they're very much like us. Worldview is a matter of birth. So when I'm talking to my white students and white relatives in general across the continent, I can't castigate them for having a bad worldview. Their worldview is what it is. All I can do is encourage them to think critically about their worldview and begin to adopt ideologies that are more healing. And over time, maybe their worldview will begin to change generation after generation after generation. For our people, I want to say to young people, embrace your worldview and critically analyze every compromise you make in order to buy into that Euro-Christian worldview. Because that's becoming second nature even to our youth. Understand that collateral egalitarian stuff. And of course, Lutheran theologians nailed me on that one. They said, yeah, but you had chiefs. Ah, yes. We have a word that you translate chief. It's gallega. But we were better than that. We had 2 in every village. And they took turns every other day being in charge, like having Hillary Clinton on Mondays and Donald Trump on Tuesdays. Then when they've bounced that around in their noggin for a minute and they realize I'm playing games with them again, they realize that gallega probably doesn't mean chief either, but something else. Because the function of that gallega was to reflect back the consensus of the whole. And the moment they do not reflect back the consensus of the whole, they're out of a job. So there's no up-down hierarchical image schema, as a Shawnee colleague here in Denver reminds the people constantly. There are no bosses in the Indian world. Yeah, we have elders. We pay attention to our elders. But elders don't make decisions for young people. They have to make their own decisions. All we old guys can do is say, this is what I would do. And then leave them to do what they're going to do. But if we've raised them right, their vision is the well-being of the whole community, the balance and harmony of the whole. And they'll do the right thing. Now I suspect I have talked enough. Kakuna wita watonde kirethani.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tink. Very, very good words. Appreciate everything you said. Yes. I don't know. I don't know if this speaker view is only on me, but everybody is really reacting very happily to this talk. I'm going to suggest that we take maybe even just a 2 or 3 minute break, just a bio break, and then we'll come back and then we'll introduce Carmen and have her chat with us for her time, and then we'll have questions and comments afterwards.
That's good because I'm middle-aged and I've got middle-aged male bladder syndrome.
Good plan. Okay, see you all in 3.
And my brother says, brother, wasn't that 25 years ago?
Good job. All right.
Everybody stop laughing.
Yes. All right, so we're recording again, so no more having fun. Well, thank you again, Tink, for your good words. I so appreciate you and have learned so much. And now I'm going to introduce my boss, Carmen Lansdowne. Carmen is a Heiltsuk woman from the Central Coast of BC and an ordained minister in the United Church of Canada. She holds a PhD in interdisciplinary studies from the Graduate Theological Union, where her dissertation focused on Indigenous epistemologies and Christian theologies of mission. Her primary research interests lie in decolonizing Indigenous histories, alternative pedagogies, and urging the prophetic witness of churches to address the continuing injustices facing Native people in the Americas. Carmen served on the central and executive committees of the World Council of Churches, as well as on the Executive General Council of the United Church of Canada. She currently serves as Executive Director at First United Church Community Ministry Society on the Downtown East Side in Vancouver, Canada. And so I would like to welcome Carmen Lansdowne to speak to us now.
Thanks, Cheryl. And Wallace guys, I've had Tink for I don't know, your leadership and your deep thinking and reflecting around the interactions, those cross worldview interactions between Indigenous peoples in our lands and everybody else who came here after.
Yeah, cool.
So I live and work and play on the traditional ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh here in Vancouver, partly by choice and partly due to generational displacement from traditional Haistach territory in the central coast of BC. And my name in Haistach is Gagwegiluk, which means dearest or dear one. And my name in Kwakwala, I was adopted by my older brother, hereditary chief Rick Johnson from Guilford Island. And my name in Kwakwala is Kwisala, which means woman who travels to places far away. In our traditions, it's often, we have many times more than one name, and we have like a childhood name and then an adult name. And so I think I was already on the executive committee of the World Council of Churches when I was given the name Kwisala. So he knew who I was when he gave me that name. But I think it's, what I appreciate about you, Tink, is seeing and recognizing the possibilities for liberation that are present through our own readings of the Jesus story, if that's how, and allowing Indigenous people the flexibility to continue to wrestle like Job with that identity and that faith tradition, even though you have moved more towards traditional ways of being and learning in the world, and not being silent about the damage that the church and settler society has done to our people in the world that we live in. It's I think my dissertation was really around struggling with given everything, like residential schools, 60 scoop, murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, dispossession from our lands, like destruction of our territories, and Indian Act, Indian Wars, Trail of Tears, given all of that and all of the role that the church played in that, how do I even justify being Christian and Native? And for me, looking at the differences, and thank you so much for outlining so many of those epistemological or worldview differences between Indigenous and Euro-Western worldviews, because it's really in looking at the ways in which our traditional worldviews, from my perspective, are more inclusive and life-giving, and humble. Not only in terms of like the possessiveness over assets and things, but just an orientation of humility that I think is better serves the created world, so I'm grateful for you and for your witness. I was looking back at my life and thinking early in my theological education, wishing that or making an assumption that the reason why liberation theology never really took hold in North America was because we only made up 3 to 4% of the population, as opposed to when it was really taking hold as a class struggle in Latin America, it was the majority of the workers that you identified that were really making this argument. And Adrian and I have had moments to talk in the past weeks around the way that liberation theology is sort of regarded within the theological academy as like an event, right? It's this thing that happened in the 70s and 80s with Boff and Gutierrez, and that it's something to be studied that is now in the past, as opposed to a continued struggle for liberation. And even when you look at all of the American Academy of Religion, and there's like 20 of us that are interested out of 5,000 that are interested in liberation theology, and who are trying to claim this, like, let's have a conversation around, from our perspective as Indigenous people, or people whose labor is used as property, like our friends from Central and South America, or people who are sold into slavery, like our African American Canadian friends. Like, from our perspective, we can talk about what we need for liberation, but the missing piece is actually that that dominance is so complete that settler society doesn't want to have a conversation about what they need for their own liberation. And Tink, at the end of your remarks, you were talking about the students who feel like an affinity for, or like some kind of like romanticized idea of what it's like to adopt an Indigenous worldview, even a political one like yours or like mine, but like not really doing the hard work of like talking to their own settler brothers and sisters around doing the liberation of the oppressor, right? Like they want to side with like people who are arguing for liberation of the oppressed, but not actually doing the work of going back out and looking at what is it that we all need from people in power to give up, and how do they adopt a more humble stance so that there can be life in abundance for all. And I think often of a paper I wrote 2 versions of it, one in my THM and one in my doctoral coursework, where I looked at the the potlatch and our economic worldviews, and especially the Hamatsa dance cycle. And in this dance cycle, there's the spirit of Bakbakwalanuksewe that overtakes the young initiate, and he becomes wild. It's generally men, also women can be Hamatsas, but the Hamatsa like runs around the big house and is screaming and terrorizing the community. And our dances are very theatrical, so like even sometimes would like jump up and like bite people, or the story goes that the Hamatsa becomes so consumed by the spirit of Bakbakwalanuksewe, which is really the spirit of greed and overconsumption, that they lose respect for community and they lose respect for the sanctity of life, so much so that they would even like consume human flesh. And it's really the process of the spirit world and the women in the community taming that spirit and bringing the Hamatsa back into balance and back into relationship, and having to remind them that, you know, we cannot be overpowered by this individualistic spirit where only my needs matter. And we start our potlatches with this dance cycle. And for me, that's a reminder. I've never published that paper anywhere because I feel like it's not really my story to tell. And it's not really the, like putting that story on paper somewhere will then make it, you know, like my particular argument about something, or a fact somebody's going to try and claim later. And but I think that even though our people on the coast of British Columbia were perceived by Boaz and others to be more hierarchical, or maybe they read that into our culture because that was their orientation. But that the whole purpose of our economic system and amassing wealth was you lived up to your name by how many people you could take care of. And the power and prestige of being a high ranking family was around taking care of other people. And I think the reason why I work here and I run this outreach initiative is one, because I feel like the church has a role to play in restitution, and the racialization of Indigenous poverty and homelessness in our city is so stark. You know, Indigenous people make up 3 to 4% of the population of Vancouver, but 40% of this neighborhood. And it's important to me that I'm really proud of the fact that we have 3 Indigenous women in ministry here. I'm really grateful to Cheryl and to Lauren for joining our team. But I also am very unapologetic about using the church's resources, in particular land value, to build Indigenous housing for our people. And I don't care if they're Christian or not. I don't care if people who access our social services here are Christian or not. And we want to design our space to be culturally safe space, so that when Indigenous people walk into our building, they feel like they are seen. And I saw a really great meme that I want to make a t-shirt out of it now. Because it's so, in my experience in like mainline Protestantism in North America, that idea of like all are welcome here, especially in like the churches that really grappled with sexual orientation and like see themselves as being inclusive of the LGBTQ community. You know, we make these proclamations like all are welcome here, all are welcome here. And I saw this meme that says, there's a difference between all are welcome here and this was designed with you in mind. And I really want what we're doing here, and this good work that Cheryl and Lauren and the rest of our staff have joined me in is to make our space designed with the people that we serve in mind. Because I feel like that's the very least the church can do. And I think, I'll say it because I'm generally at a point in my career where I can say the things that I want without getting in too much trouble, but I'm probably not far behind you, Tink. I was in a racial justice training seminar on Saturday, put on by the United Church of Canada, and it's required for all ministry personnel, and it's encouraged for all to attend it. And very wisely, they've split the two sessions. The first two sessions are segregated. So there's one session 1 and 2 cohort for white people. And then there's one session 1 and 2 cohort for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So I think that it creates some safety for the white people to like be able to make mistakes and not feel like they're going to offend anybody by like questioning or struggling with the things that they struggle with. And for the Black and Indigenous people of color, so we don't have to be like educating the white people about our experiences of racial justice or racial injustice in the church. And at the end, there was this Bible study, and they used the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well. And one of the questions was like, how did Jesus become acquainted with whiteness in this story? And I just got so mad. And I said, well, like, I don't like thinking of Jesus as whiteness, and I don't even like this story because, you know, it's saying that Jesus is breaking the cultural stereotypes by reaching out to the Samaritan woman and saying like, oh, I don't think you're untouchable or unclean because you're a Gentile. And so then she converts and fought, like all the power dynamics of that are all wrong to me. And I don't understand, like it, I don't want to talk about that. And I don't want to talk about the Bible. And like the whole Bible is dangerous to me. And I think that there is some like liberative story in some of the faith tradition that's come out of it. But like, the Bible is not Jesus's word. It's not what really happened. The Bible is like what the church selected as things that they wanted to say is their message. And I got really mad in this Bible study. And I was thinking back to this poem. Let me see if I can find it. And I think, you know, I struggle with, I don't know, the hypocrisy of the church with the, with the ways in which Indigenous worldviews are celebrated, but only really like in a multicultural way, not truly in a transformational way. I'm really grateful to Adrian for his leadership at the Sandy Soto Center, and you know, I've had some opportunities to talk with him and a couple of other people in theological education around like the power structures in the church are still alive and well. And we can say like, oh, we want to work on, you know, indigenizing the church, and like, okay, that's great, but you go over there and do that and then come back and tell us and we'll let you know if that's okay or not, you know. So I don't know, like those are the things that I still struggle with and reflect on. And I think the other reason why I stay in the church is because It's less so now, but when I was growing up, the church was still a place of pretty significant political power. And I had the experience as a young woman of youth group being a safe place to be myself and a place of community for me. And being appointed to participate in the courts of the church as a youth representative. And the United Church of Canada prides itself on being a very roots in the social gospel and quite a social justice oriented church. And at the time, Bella Bella, which is where the reserve for the Haitian people is, didn't have a ferry. You couldn't access the community by car. Like you could only fly in on a float plane, or you could go in by ferry boat, but you had to walk on and off the ferry. And my mother and I having discussions about how racist that was, because if it was a white community of 1,000 people, you could bet there would be a ferry ramp so that people could drive their cars on and off the island. And so I wrote a resolution to the BC Conference of the United Church of Canada as a 14 or a 15-year-old and said that this is a social justice issue and that our people deserve to have better access to our community if we were going to be, dependent on BC ferries. And I asked the church, I asked the executive secretary and the president of the conference on behalf of the provincial church to write a letter to the CEO of the BC Ferries Corporation and to the premier of the province at the time, and I think the Minister of Transport, asking them to reopen conversations around creating a ferry ramp in Bella Bella. And I didn't get involved in the community level side of things, but by the time I graduated from high school, there was a ferry ramp in our community. And I don't even know if people at home in Bella Bella know that I did that, but I kind of had this, holy smokes, like when you get these like white people with power saying this is an issue, then like other white people with power listen. And I want to be part of that. So I don't think it's that when I think back over the last 100 years and the fact that the moderator of the United Church of Canada used to have breakfast every month with the Prime Minister, like that that part of Christendom in Canada is gone. But when Chief Bobby Joseph, who was one of the ambassadors for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada, just before I moved to California to do my PhD, he came and spoke to the BC Conference of the United Church and said, the hearings for the TRC are coming. And he said, my biggest fear, like we worked so hard to make this happen, and my biggest fear is that no non-Indigenous people will come. That it'll just be our people saying to the commissioners our story, but there's no witness or truth hearing from the non-Indigenous community. And the truth is the churches have a responsibility to come because you perpetrated the residential schools along with the government. And so I need you to show up. I need you to come and to be there. And then when his daughter started the Truth and Reconciliation Walk, she thought, she was trying to make her dad's dream come true. And she thought that, 50 people would come and 700 or 50,000 people would come was her dream. And 700,000 people came and did this procession through Vancouver at the opening of the TRC hearings. And, from my experience of talking about things with people outside of British Columbia, that the number of non-Indigenous people who attended the TRC hearings in Vancouver is significantly higher than anywhere else in the country. And so, I think people reacted in the way that they often do when they're learning to recognize and start to grieve the amount of systemic racism that they've never been exposed to. And then when those scales drop from their eyes and like, oh my God, I can see systemic racism. And it's like, I see systemic racism and it's everywhere. and they get overwhelmed by that. But at least they're owning that here in Vancouver in a way that I don't see anywhere. I certainly don't see it in the US. And it was the experience of like leaving Canada, going to Berkeley to do my PhD, feeling completely invisible. You know, that piece that Andy Smith wrote around like Native Americans must always be disappearing because the logic of cultural genocide is so strong that the cognitive dissonance of realizing that all of America was native land, that like, you know, it wasn't terra nullius when Euro Westerners came here. Like that's so true in the US. And experiencing that really viscerally in a way I didn't because like at home, because I was always sort of somewhat adjacent to our traditional territories and practices. And then coming back post TRC and being like everybody's so aware of racism and like the reconciliation, and it was almost disconcerting because I also missed participating in all of that. And so it gives me hope. And then in the day-to-day, when I'm having to have these conversations with people about like, well, why are you doing Indigenous housing though? Like First United is for everybody. I'm like, also though, like 40% of our neighbors are Indigenous, and 40% of people experiencing homelessness on this 10 blocks of Hastings Street are Indigenous. And the need is greater. And also reconciliation in action means that we have to put our resources where our mouths are when we say that we care about our Indigenous sisters and brothers, regardless of who they are or where they are in life's journey, or where they came from, or if they're Christian or not. The church needs to make space that is designed with them in mind, designed with us in mind. And you know, I still struggle with that a lot, but I love, you know, if I can quote a non-Indigenous person I admire for her truth telling is Brene Brown. And I love the rumble, right? Like I love rumbling with all of these things and wrestling with them. And I see the urgency of climate change and the eschatological implications of industrialism that are not good. You know, the fact that like the end times actually may be within our sight and within our life. And I think about Gabriel and Esperanza and Teope and, you know, like all of the children and the fact that their lives will be radically altered before they're gone from this world because of, you know, 300 or 400 generations of living in an extreme unbalance. And I think, you know, part of me wants to just go home and put my feet in the water on the beach in Bella Bella or in Alert Bay, which also feels like home to me, and just like block it all out. And then I think, you know, the part of the Jesus story of Jesus going into the tables and going to the temple and flipping the tables and like yelling at his community in self-righteous anger about the ways in which their laws and their levels of unbalance had so deeply impacted the world that he lived in. And I think like, is that the highest and best use of my time and talents? And at the same time as I feel really displaced still, I feel a yearning to go home and to be on an island in the middle of an ocean. And I work 3 blocks from the ocean and I never see it. So I didn't expect to get really emotional talking about all this stuff, but I also you know, if there's ways like you, my teacher, that I can use my words to make some of those statements to people who might never totally understand, but at least have ears to hear, then I'll keep doing that as long as I can. So yeah, I want to leave time for our friends to have a discussion with us too. So I think I'll probably end there. And if I can find the poem that I had it all queued up, and then I started kind of jumping around in this paper that I had open. So if I can find it, I'll read it. But otherwise, maybe I'll turn it back over to Cheryl, and we can start our conversational part of this.
Thank you, Carmen. I definitely feel everything you were saying as well. I so long to just be back in Natley and, you know, hanging out with my aunties and putting my feet in the Natley River as well. But yeah, it's I always say it's hard work, but it's good work to do what we're doing here. So thank you for your good words. Thank you for your good, strong words. I love it that you said I got really angry in a Bible study. I was like, yes, me too. I'm with you. I love you so much right now. But yeah, but anyway, Ray's got to go here pretty quick. So I'm going to ask Ray if he could just comment on the talks and maybe anything you want to say, Ray.
Thank you, Tinker, for your talk. I always enjoyed your comments about space, place versus time. I actually used that in my thesis, that comment. It's a good point, particularly among the Cree. The Cree so understood that their identity would get larger with the coming of the newcomers, as evidenced in Canada by the Métis, who I'm related to, who were, Louis Riel thought that they took the best from both worlds and made another people. I don't know if I'd go so far as that. But when we made treaty, which we still are treaty nations, and when we speak with the government of Canada, we always have to have a representative of the Crown there because we made treaty with the Crown. We understood that our self-determination was enshrined in those treaties, yet they made provision for the newcomers. So anything that you can do that would help continue to hold these. So we try to hold these two things together, and this space in the middle is about collaboration. And so I appreciate what you had to say about those things. And Carmen, your comments are very good. You're on to something. When I first moved to the West Coast, I noticed a lot of people were moving in a good direction, except their blind spot was they thought that systemic racism, that they could opt out of it just by saying, oh, I'm not like that. So anything you can continue to do to point out how this thing is, it's trickier than that. If it was just so easy as we could just make a decision in our mind and not be like that, that would be something. But anything you could do to help people see that, no, it's different than that. This is about how Patricia Vickers puts it. This is about sort of brain therapy, helping to heal certain things that have sort of like when you're in addiction, you know, you have brain damage. So I appreciate that. I won't apologize for leaving. My wife said I should be home, so I'm gonna go. She has more authority than you guys do. Sorry, but no, I'm not gonna apologize. That's just the way it is. Good to see you all my relatives.
Yeah, I'm grateful for Ray and Elaine, good people. Thanks for those good words, Ray. Uh, and so I'll ask Adrian if you have any comments.
I always found Mel Brooks' movie, The 2,000-Year-Old Man, a pretty interesting movie. So when I heard about the 1,500-year-old Euro Jesus, I thought, okay, there's another person in the Mel Brooks pantheon. I think I'd go see that movie too, which is very interesting to me because it's like, here is a character. And when I'm thinking about it now, that 1,500-year-old Euro Jesus is a character, a fictional character that's been created out of some background material, and that's a fiction, and there's such deep theological roots in this fictional character who has these things that Tink has mentioned about individualism and that whole baggage that goes with Western Christianity, justification by faith alone, and sola scriptura, by scripture alone, and etc. All of that, aloneness. And one of the things that I never felt in my life is emptiness. In Western Christianity, they would talk about, the God-shaped void in you. Well, I never felt any God-shaped void. I never felt any void at all. Like I never felt empty or alone. And always intact with my family, my community, my identity, and never really bought into that language. But that's the language of this fictional Jesus that we were sold. We were sold a bill of goods, and among the bill of goods was this fictional Jesus, and kind of peeling away all of that, and really getting down to the story itself, even looking at scripture, I about the idea of no creator. I thought about the Haudenosaunee creation story, as Tink, you've mentioned Seneca story. It begins with a sky world, and there's a whole bunch of beings in the sky world. And when I think about that, I think that's Elohim. That's that very first word in the Hebrew scriptures, community, that's already in existence. And then we look at this. When we meet one another, we ask the question, "Where are you from?" And then we ask, "Who are your relatives?" And we don't mean what's your address. We mean, what land are you from? And then, who are your relatives? So I thought about the book of Genesis, and I thought, Genesis chapter 1 is all about our elders, our genealogy, beginning with community, Elohim, and then darkness or mystery, and then light, and then waters above and waters below, and the sky, and the sun and the moon, elders, the waters, the depth, the animals, the birds, dry land, the sea, all of our elders, all of these things that have taught us these things, and then we show up on the scene, weak creatures needing the rest of creation. And I loved that idea of humility, that there's an inherent humility in the story that is completely missed by the Western Church. So I really have I've got 3 pages, 778 words that I've taken in the notes tonight, all categorized out into decolonizing and Euro-Christian theological framework and and et cetera. So I'm really appreciative of both the presentations and I love it when folks in their languages begin to tell us meaning from the culture. So that idea of creative energy, male and female creative energy, is very much that same idea with the Haudenosaunee, as he mentioned, the Sky Woman first, and then gives birth to the daughter. So before there are any men in this world, this water world, there are 2 women creators who bring the life of the sky world here in the Haudenosaunee world. And then the twins are born. And I saw that through Grafton Antone. Some of you know Grafton Antone. He's United Church, Oneida elder who knows the language. And he told me the story of the twins, and he didn't cast it in the light of good and evil. He cast it in the light of just, there's this part of us that is, we want things easy, and there's this part of us that's competitive. It's just being human, not just, not bad, but human. And I just recently had a Facebook Messenger conversation with Yvonne Thomas, the widow of Jake Thomas. Jake Thomas was a Onondaga hereditary chief. He knew 5 of the 6 Haudenosaunee languages. He was very good in teaching the culture and our values. And as a young pastor, I wrote an article one time in a local newspaper where I criticized the false face mask. But when Grafton Antone told me the origin of the false face mask and that whole desire to bring healing to the community, I completely changed my view on that. I said, I didn't know what I was talking about as a young pastor. And so I again apologized to Yvonne. And I said, I'm sorry that Jake isn't here to hear this apology. And she said, oh, I remember the story well. And she says, there's no need for asking apology. If you can forgive yourself, that's okay. So that was just really good. I really appreciated that. And really, I'm thankful for all that you had to say tonight, Carmen. So many good pieces. Love the political perspective, like the power, the decision-making dimension, and how that the Indigenous Church fostered that and helped make a place for you in that way. The politics of the rest of the church is still ongoing, and it does its thing, and it hurts and it damages, etc. But the Indigenous dimension provided a place for that nurturing of that which I see in you, and I've heard that's in your mother as well. So thank you for sharing that, sharing your story here tonight.
Thank you, Adrian. Good words. Before we go to Hubert and then Lauren, I wanted to ask Carmen if you have that poem. Oh, mute. You're on mute.
No, I can't find it, but I have another poem that I can use to close us with afterwards.
Okay.
That
cool.
not one that I quoted somebody else.
Okay, we'll come back to that then at the
Okay.
end. Who did I say was Hubert? Did I say you were going next?
Yes. Thank you for sharing, Carmen and Tinker. It's a pleasure to listen and to learn. I'm a notoriously slow processor, so I'll probably wake up at 3 in the morning thinking, "Oh, I should have asked that question. That would have been a perfect question." But during both of you guys' talks, and it started when Tinker said the phrase, "I'm good with God." It's up to you to decide if you're good with God. And it just reminded me of, and you're talking about land and identity, and that's very much true for most Indigenous peoples. And I know it's especially true for the Nisga'a, because we get our identity and our ways and our knowing of being from our land, from the Nisga'a Valley. And just hearing Carmen share, and just although the idea of struggle and identity, all just throughout all the stories, it just reminded me of when I first started on this walk that I'm on, and shortly after 2010. And I remember, and it's funny because it wasn't until I actually started this walk that I'm on, and kind of surrendered my life to God, so to speak. And I was at church one day, and I had my hand drum. It was my dad's hand drum with me, and I was using it to sing songs at our church army. And a visitor was there with us, and he got mad at me for using the drum inside the church. And I remember being so brokenhearted that he got mad at me for using my hand drum to sing and to praise God and to thank God. And this was around the same time that I was also starting to explore my culture and my ways of knowing and being a lot more. I've joined cultural dancing. I started learning my cultural songs. I started learning a little bit more of my language, and I started understanding the reasoning of why we do things the way we do, especially when it comes to our chiefs and our matriarchs and our feast system and everything like that. And I absolutely loved it. And then I kind of was torn between these two worlds where, okay, I absolutely love Jesus, because, if it wasn't for the love of God, I honestly would not be here today. And I love my culture. I love my identity. I love my land. I love who I am, because it just feels perfectly right to do that and to sing with the hand drum, to sing and drum along to Christian worship music and stuff like that. And I remember being pulled in these two different directions, and people over here who were so lost and not lost, but like deep in their culture, that they wanted nothing to do with Christianity. And I had these people who were so deep in Christianity, they wanted me to have nothing to do with my culture. And I was so confused, because I'm like, but this is who God created me to be. This is who I am. I don't know any other way right now. And so I just decided, I remember sitting with my dad and talking about this and sharing this. And I said, okay, you guys over there, you guys can go be miserable over there. You guys can go be miserable over there. I'm just going to be right here in this third space to be exactly who God created me to be. And then I came to Vancouver, and then I started studying theology, and I remember doing biblical studies, and I remember studying the Trinity, and I'm learning about social Trinitarianism and liberation theology. And I just began to find all these fingerprints. And I began with these, I call them fingerprints because I read this book by Peter J. Lightheart called Traces of the Trinity. And it was about finding just little pieces of God in everyday life, basic life, like time, past, present, future, anything like that. And I remember learning about the nature of the Trinity and the nature of God. And I just saw Christ's fingerprints all over my culture and all over me and all over our ways of knowing and being. And that just gave me so much life, and it just gave me so much joy, that I remember going home for Hobier after going through that experience and learning that, and going home to Hobier to celebrate and to sing and to dance and to celebrate our Nisga'a New Year, which is Hobier. I remember looking up at the moon and dancing underneath it, and just being filled with so much gratitude that I could be both Native and Christian. I could be both Indigenous and Christian, and I could be exactly who God created me to be. And it was these things that have helped me along my journey to be who I am. And so I just wanted to know what moments or what has been helpful for you guys in your journey to allow you to be authentically you.
Cheryl, can I have a short response to Hubert?
Yes, please.
Two things come to mind. One is to correct one impression about me that I don't want to leave you with. But the first one is to remember Four Winds American Indian Council back in 1989. How long ago is that? 30 plus years. When we were having ceremony. In fact, back then it was still very much a Christian ceremony. We had a drummer there, a famous singer in the community from North Dakota, Lakota guy from Standing Rock. He was raised an Episcopalian, and I talked him into singing a powerful ceremony song in one of our church sessions. He told me afterwards he was scared to death singing that song. He was sure that God was going to strike him dead. But from that time on, he always sang in our ceremony. That was the watershed. It broke the dam. What a wonderful man. What a wonderful singer. He was 15 years sober when he first came to me, but still had that fear that God was going to strike him dead because of what the missionaries told him about not having a drum in the church. The other thing I want to kind of correct, and out of great respect for you and your journey and what you're doing, I didn't say I'm good with God. I said that's the Reformation justification by faith interpretation that people still have, that the self is good with God and the community doesn't count. That's in that white Euro-Christian world. I have to say, and I wrote that article, Why I Don't Believe in a Creator, that I came to the decision about 20 years ago that Osages don't have a word for God. The only word for God we have is a word the missionaries picked and mistranslated. So that I've spent the last 20 years not in relationship with this up-down image scheme of God, but with the Wanagi, what a lot of Euro-Christians call the spirits, or the spirit world, except that we Indians are very materialistic. So these spirits have bodies. And those who I sing songs to, those are the ones I bring into my ceremony. And a couple of them talk to me. I'll tell you, I'll quit after this. One of them's a crazy coyote, a black coyote who came to me when I made Noji Jean, the Rite of Vigil, almost 20 years ago now. And he's still hanging around me and talking to me and helping people. Just a wonderful character. And he reminds me that I'm kind of like that coyote, doing things backwards. I'm not home on the reservation. I'm in the city teaching white people in a school of theology. and he keeps telling me, don't think you're anybody special. You're just a coyote. Kakuna, that's all I'll say.
I love that. That gives so much freedom to just be. You're doing things backwards. It feels like my whole life explained. Thank you. So I'm going to ask Lauren for her thoughts.
Yes. Chamagwitch, that was wonderful. It's also, I was reminded of a few things. Um, I remember back maybe 2000, early 2000s, I was in seminary for my Master of Divinity at Louisville, Kentucky. And I remember meeting Augustine for the first time and having a lot of issues with with this influential man, and especially the concept of pride. I was so confused. I remember walking into one of my professor's offices one day and saying, I don't I don't get this stuff. I'm modifying what I'm saying, being very politic about how retelling this story. And I was like, I don't get this stuff. I don't think seminary's for me. And he sat me down and said, what do you mean? And I was like, I spent a lot of years uh before coming to seminary, and pride is a good thing. Like, you need to have pride. You need to have a good understanding, good self-confidence, understanding of who you are, where you come from, um, your ancestors' stories. Uh, it's important to have that kind of, it's important to have pride. And so then you're telling me that I am failing Augustine because I think pride is okay. And he was like, well, it wasn't, we don't mean that kind of pride. And I'm like, do you mean like greed? Do you mean like hate? And he's like, no, we mean pride. And I'm like, no, I think you mean like greed, and like, that you hate other people. And he's like, no. And so I'm like, well, that's what I'm taking pride to mean now. That's what I mean. That's what Augustine's pride means to me. It's the new dictionary term. And it wasn't until like I had studied more like systemic racism and understanding of what it means to be, um, what systems of oppression look like and how power works and manifests. I remember sitting in a particular um, teaching, and um, they were telling us that there are 3 levels of power in terms of systemic oppression, and then like the first stage is this power 1, which is all the bad things that happen to the marginalized people. That is one form of power, and then a power of oppression. And then stage 2 is um, the benefits and privileges that the dominant group receive by giving up something of themselves. And then there's this power 3 part where all of humanity, all of creation is dehumanized. All of creation is um, becomes less, becomes commodified, and that all of these work in a cycle. They work in a cycle together. And I remember also putting that together with what Ray was saying about addictions, because we work a lot with people with that have addictions, and how the brain changes, and that you think you need something that you actually don't need, but that your brain tells you that you need it to survive, and not just um, it would be good to have. It's a clawing desperation needing feeling, that you need these things in order to survive, and it's just not true. And so letting go of that, letting go of like what you talked about, Tink, which was individualism, temporality, up-down hierarchy. My understanding of Potawatomi understanding is more spiral. It's always a spiral. We come back around. And so, yeah, just letting go of that clawing, desperate need, thinking that we needed something that we actually don't need. That is what I'm reminded of as I'm listening to both Carmen and Tink talk. So my question for the two of you is, what would you tell your younger self after you've been on this particular journey where you are now? Is there something that you would maybe tell yourself, maybe to encourage the journey you already had, or change the journey that you had? I'm just wondering.
Let's ask Tink to answer this question first, and then Carmen.
I think the most important thing I would have to say to my younger self is immerse yourself in the language sooner. Go home more often. It's what I told when I was at the University of Melbourne. I told young Aboriginal students, graduate students, I told them, because there was an Aboriginal medicine man in the room from way up north in Darwin. I said, what you young natives need to do, you young Indigenous Aboriginals, is put your graduate degree on the back burner for a year. Buy yourself a tent and go up and camp in this man's front yard and help him. Spend a year with him, listen to him, learn everything he has to teach you. I heard a couple years after I was in Melbourne that one of those guys actually did that. That's what I would do if I were younger and had it to do over again. Kakuna.
Probably the same. I mean, our language, when I was in high school, our language had less than 100 fluent speakers left. So there's a really healthy language reclamation process happening in Bella Bella now. And luckily they're starting to make it accessible to, the 75% of us that don't live on the reservation. So there's like a Facebook Heishchakala reclamation page. And some of my cousins are, they'll say a sentence like, I'm going out seaweed picking with my auntie or whatever. And they're just like, they're making all these little like TikTok videos and things like that, just to make the language more accessible. And it's still not. I was actually thinking when I was getting in the shower last night that instead of doing some other things I might do with my disposable income, what I do is just get one of the people who's like more fluent in our language here to just come to my office and like tutor me once a week, because like going to trying to run these two big organizations and like still be a present parent and partner means that like Thursdays from 6 till 7 is not an ideal time for me to go to the urban class here. But you know, even getting somebody who knows more than me, which is almost nothing. Like I know how to say again, Hamsa, like come to the table, or you know, ifpa means delicious, and you know, there's things my mom will say to me that I understand, and her language is very limited too. But investing more time to learn our language is part of like making sure that it survives as a political act, but also because I mean, it's really, you know, I think that a lot of Indigenous people are necessarily bicultural already. You know, like we have I didn't realize until I took Martin Brokenleg's class on Aboriginal and Western thought at Vancouver School of Theology in like 2004, that I had experienced culture shock every damn day of my life in school. You know, so like I graduated from high school in 1993, never took a break. I went to university forever. And he'd talk about stuff and be like, oh my God, like that was culture shock. That was like, I'm not crazy. Like that, the way that I thought about things or approached problems or knew something without being able to explain how I knew something, like that's all just different worldviews. And I think especially because in my family, it's my mom who's Heistio. Like the gendered experience of being her daughter and what that meant in terms of like, I never questioned my indigeneity in the way that I think my brother really struggled with it. And so I've always had these opportunities to be the woman who travels to many places far away. And I wish that I had spent more time at home in Bella Bella and in Alert Bay before I had obligations to work and children and things like that. But I'm grateful that my kids also really love our home territories and love where we're from. And it's exciting for them to go home to see their granny and papa and to go home to Bala Bala. And I don't know, it's easy to say that, but then, you know, 20 years ago when I was in my 20s, that there weren't as many people that spoke the language, and there wasn't the resources to do it either. So that's maybe a 2021 looking back and wishing that on people. I also wish I'd I guess just not been in such a rush. Like I struggled so much through my undergrad. It took me 8 years to finish my undergrad. And I wish I'd just taken a break and gone home and just like really felt grounded there instead of struggling in this like very different world for so long. Because some of my aunties that I spent a lot of time with in the summers after I graduated from high school are gone now. And my papa is gone. Yeah, it all seemed to go by really fast.
Yeah, thank you for that good advice. Yeah, it's always so important to reconnect to the land. I always talk about that's like what makes us natives, that connection. It's and language, identity is in language. It's been a struggle for me as well, just because my mom going to residential school, my grandpa wanted all of us to succeed in the white world, so we would ask him questions or about how to say things, but he just always wanted to speak English to us. My beautiful grandpa, and no grandma. I lost my grandma. My mom lost her mom when she was 4. So there's all these losses that contributed to, the our colonization. And I kind of feel like in my life, I've been on a journey of decolonization like my whole life, and just the overwhelming tsunami of um, colonization, assimilation, eradication attempts on my indigeneity has been like overwhelming. It's been so hard, and as a Christian, it's doubled almost. You know, being in the church and being a Christian, there's so much more pressure to not be native, and there's so much more pressure of you know, oh, your land is full of darkness. Oh, your earrings have evil spirits. You know, all of that kind of stuff. So there's so much more oppression, cultural, Western dominant Christian, whatever. It seems like it's doubled when you're in the church and as a Christian. So that's been brutal. And the decolonization process, like I'm 52 years old today. I'm turning 53 in September. Um, and I just kind of feel like, oh man, there's still times where I'm like, I'll catch myself some. And I love how Tink, you talked about there's no word for it in Osage. There's no word for thing, and everything has a gender and all of that. I love that because and I kind of feel like, oh yeah, you know, whenever we listen to elders, we're always reminded about those good things. And I have I just recently moved to a different apartment, and I the thing that I miss most about my old apartment is the tree that was outside the window. And there's a great big picture window in the living room, and this tree would fill this. Normally in the winter when there's no leaves, you can see across the alley into the annoying neighbor's balcony and everything. But in the summertime and in springtime now there's more leaves, but I love this tree. And I kept thinking, I would talk to this tree, and I kept thinking, this tree is alive. It's alive in a different way, in a way that I don't understand, and we can't always communicate, but I feel something, right? So I love that you remind us to remember our relatives. And Carmen talked about humility and dependence. Dependence came up a lot as well in the whole talk about earth and eschatology, and that Indigenous worldview has that humility of, you know, we are such babies. We are just babies on the face of our mother, you know, and we're so utterly dependent. One thing goes off and we're done, you know. And that I think Indigenous folks really have a strong sense of that dependence, that strong sense of interdependence. We're not above nature in any way, and I really yeah, anyway, so that whole colonization process, I feel like, again, I've been a little more decolonized. I wanted to actually ask Tink, what do you think about, because you talked about Indigenous worldview, and I've sort of thought about the Bible as being, the New Testament being really influenced by Greek philosophy and the Greek worldview of the flesh and the spirit, and how those things have to be so far apart and they can't touch, or the spirit world gets ruined by the spirit of flesh. So we talk about heaven as being, like every Christian today, we talk about heaven as being up there somewhere, you know, like I grew up with this idea that the earth is sort of like bad, but heaven is pure. And that's Greek philosophy. And I always wondered, well, where is heaven? Like, is it like, you know, it's got to be like in the atmosphere. It can't be in space, because that would be weird, you know. So, you know, for heaven, we have to have it a little bit closer. But and I've always sort of felt like Indigenous, or I've actually wondered, maybe is a better term, if it seemed to me like ancient Hebrew philosophy or worldview was a little bit more closer to Indigenous, where we don't see the separation of the spirit and the flesh. We see them more as intertwining like this. And I feel like, yeah, I just wanted to ask your thoughts on that. And Carmen as well.
Yeah, fascinating question. I've spent a good deal of time over the past 20 plus years reflecting on theoretical physics. In fact, my early university education was in physics. I have a minor in physics. And I did a course with my wife. She actually got the funding for it 20 years ago, titled Indigenous Knowledge or Indigenous Knowledges and Western Science. Today I would call it Euro-Christian Science, because the word science means knowledge. In that seminar, we were arguing that there are two different worlds of knowledge, and they both work. They work in different ways. Euro-Christian science is powerful. It put human beings on the moon for the first time in, well, the Navajos say 1,000 years at least, because there were Navajos on the moon before that. But the more I read theoretical physics, the more I realize they're moving closer and closer to what the elders taught me across this turtle island. In fact, I delivered a paper 20 years ago that included a Nobel physicist in the audience, Charlie Towns, who just died last year at 100 years old. So he was 80 already when he heard my paper. The scientists in the room didn't have any trouble with me talking about the title of my paper was The Consciousness of Rocks. They were able to concede that. It was young graduate students who had trouble with it, and theologians. The theologians were trying to cement a relationship with natural sciences as, being in the same game. And here I was driving a wedge between them and winning the scientists over to an American Indian notion of rocks being people. As Vine said decades ago, rocks move. They just move more slowly because they're more settled in their relationships with the rest of the world. I got into string theory. I guess that was around 95. I read that book by, what's his name? The Elegant Universe. William Green, Brian Green. Essentially, some of what their musings were is what the elders taught me. Namely, there's no heaven up there. We don't have a word for heaven. There's no heaven down there either, or hell. And we all know, I think by now, that hell was invented in the 3rd century by bishops in order to control the common people. But rather, the Wanagi come to us from the Wanagi world, which is actually right here. See, theoretical physicists have told us that multiple universes are layered one on top of the other. And they're not a million miles apart or a million light years apart. They're here. We just live in this universe, and we can't access those other universes. But the Wanagi can. And in ceremony, we're able to open portals for them to come and talk to us. My Shomikati Sape, that black coyote I mentioned, doesn't live in this universe. He lives in that Wanagi universe. But he's found a way to come into this world even when I don't call him in. In the middle of the night, I'll hear him growling off in a corner in his sleep or chewing on a bone, especially when my dog's not present, when my dog's in the basement. There are other Wanagi that come to me, eagles in this case, because I'm Eagle Clan, remember. They're ancestral Wanagi. And they manage to come when I sing certain songs, in a ceremony, when I load a pipe. I know my parents are in that world too. And they come when I put food on a plate for them and invite them in. Our ancestors didn't have heaven and hell. They just knew their ancestors went to that Wanagi world. And eventually we could continue to have relationship with them. It doesn't matter what they did in this world, whether they were good or bad, because they were all community people. Now we have this heightened radical individualism, and sure enough, we've got some people who are not just bijou, but bijion, really bad. Another word we didn't have was sin. The missionaries had to come and pick a word and then convince us that we were sinful, whatever that means. Just as they convinced us eventually that we were warlike. I still have no idea what the word warlike means. It's a strange word. We don't look like a war. In fact, it's the Christians who were busy killing 11 million of each other while they were invading Turtle Island. And one US census projected back in the 1890s that maybe American Indians killed 5,000 since the formation of the United States, Euro-Christians. 5,000? And we're warlike? When you all killed a whole lot more of us, massacres of 200, 300, 500 on this side of the medicine line. And you all came with 1,500 years of developed war-making technology that we couldn't even begin to match. And you say we're warlike. Well, sinful is like that. I mean, it's their word. Let them enjoy their sin if they want. But we don't have a word for that. So I quit worrying about sin. Yeah, sure, we have moments where we misspeak ourselves, misbehave. That doesn't mean we're innately evil. That's that Christian take on the biblical story. Jewish people don't buy it about, the Old Testament, by the way. But it worked to whip Native people into compliance, into what Robert Williams in his book calls normative compliance with Euro-Christian colonialism. So I talk to my relatives in that Wanagi world every day, all the time. And I'm happy to. And it seems to me they're happy to hear from me and happy to talk to me. My mother doesn't know quite to make of it, but my dad is happy. My mother was not Indian. She was the Lutheran. She was Norwegian, and was already, what, 10 generations Lutheran. So maybe that helps a little bit to unpack heaven and hell.
Yes, thank you very much. I
By the
appreciate it.
way, I was at one time a biblical scholar. I don't think Paul knows what heaven is either. I think he's spinning his wheels in 1 Corinthians 15, trying to say what he doesn't even vaguely understand. And I always appreciated that about Paul.
Yeah, yeah. My take on Paul in the New Testament is a lot of what I see him doing is trying to contextualize the gospel or faith to the Greek mind. And I don't know if that's even, yeah, I don't know. But
I don't think you're wrong about that. I think that's certainly a part of the writing of the New Testament. It's written in a Greek world, especially in the world of the philosophy of the time was Neoplatonism.
Mhm. Yeah, and I so love when Carmen said just the disillusionment with the powers structures whatever in the Bible and some of the stories that like make me angry as well, or some of the interpretations, especially applications that have been weaponized against Indigenous people or people of color. I always say we didn't have a slave version of the Bible, but we had a colonized version of the Bible, and an application for sure was um, given to us. And I always say I really I follow badass Jesus, the one that's flipping tables and making room for other people and other yeah. So yeah, that's kind of been my my thing. But we're coming to the end of our time here, so I'm going to ask Carmen if she'll have the last word. And first of all, I'll just thank our viewers, whoever is listening here. I don't know if you're able to make comments on our First United site, but feel free to get in contact with any of us via email for sure. Carmen and myself and Lauren at First United. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening to this. I hope it's been as helpful to you as it has been to all of us. And we'll be making some more videos as well in the future. So thanks on behalf of First United, and I'm going to give Carmen the last word. And thanks everybody also for your good words. Thanks to Ray, thanks to Adrian, thanks to Hubert and Lauren. I so appreciate you all very much. And many thanks to Tinker for your wisdom. And I just feel like such a little kid around you, and I love that feeling of just like learning and gleaning so much from you. So thank you so much for your time, and Carmen as well for your wisdom. I always feel like a little kid around you when we talk about justice issues as well, and I'm just kind of like learning, even though I think some of my best mentors have been younger than me. So I'm really grateful for you and for that, Carmen.
Thanks, Cheryl. I think my computer is coming at the end of its like Zoom bandwidth, so hopefully I'm not freezing up on your side as much as I feel like I'm freezing up on my side. So this is a poem that I wrote when I lived in Sanford, or like in the Bay Area, when I was at Berkeley, and it's called "I Don't Want You to Go," I think. I remember being at a conference, World Christian Student Federation, student activists seeking to emulate Jesus's radical inclusivity, like embodying theologian Dominic Crossan's idea of open commensality. We worship together singing Maranatha, come Spirit come, draw the circle wide, Lord Jesus. During sermon time, like good egalitarian interpreters of the word, rather than the tireless moral harangue of a homily, I love that definition, we discussed our perfect North America as we imagined it, inspired by the prophet Amos. What would your perfect North America look like? We were asked. Laughing, I answer, the 97% of you who have no connection to our Indigenous communities would go home. No one else laughed. My comment is based in a frustration I voice over and over in other poems, in my papers, my political comment, And on the one hand, I don't take it back. But the truth is, I love my life. I love the diversity of North America. I love fair trade coffee. I love eating Lebanese food. I love corn dogs, I'm ashamed to say. Where else in the world can you celebrate 100% processed wannabe meat on a stick? I love the spectacle of the Rose Bowl parade. I love, as strange as it may seem to my waspy Canadian sisters and brothers, the oddity of cheerleaders and color guards at a football game. I love the freedom that I have as a member of the Academy to engage other scholars from all over the world who share their human stories with me. I love how smart people are in universities. But can you understand what it's like to be me? Hiding my Native identity under the cloak of my white skin inherited by my Native mother, whose families also had light skin because Heistrik people just do? Can you hear my heart splinter into a million pieces when the consistent dehumanization and repression of our Indigenous communities means I'm asked to celebrate my success as a Native scholar as long as I don't ask all of us to work towards solutions to Indian problems? Can you see how it's unfair to put the burden on us to educate you, to ask for justice from you, to ask forgiveness from you, to beg your pardon for having broken spirits and not having gotten our shit together yet? The truth is, despite this creative tension that sometimes threatens to break my spirit, that pulls and pushes me, I still love what this place has become most of the time. I still believe that most people intend to be good and to live the golden rule. I believe that together we can solve the hard ugliness of disparate experiences of dominant and Native Canadian society. And so no, I don't want you to go, I think.
Thank you so much. If we indeed were on speaker view alone, there was a rousing applause from everyone.
Yay!
So thank you again, dear friends, and I hope to see you again soon.
Good to be with you all.
Take care, everyone.
All
Have
right.
you